Hi everyone. Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to share with you and talk about my Execute Your Dream course, which is a new online program that I've just launched this week. Execute Your Dream is about the gap between setting the dream and creating your dream and making the dream a reality. Welcome to Execute Your Dream.
Execute Your Dream is a blueprint for designing and putting into action a unique plan to help you achieve your goals with purpose.
There is nothing that can happen unless you're taking action.
Confidence.
So you'll be walking around in life and just like, I feel so powerful because I've got power moves all over the place.
And a loving mindset.
Know that you're supported. Know that I'm with you. Know that you have everything that you need
so that you can start living your dream life.
If you are interested in executing on your dream in 2020, then go to shirleymcalpine.com/execute. That's shirleymcalpine.com/execute to find out more about the course and then enroll in the program now, today. I look forward to seeing you in the Execute Your Dream course. You're listening to She's Got Drive podcast, the podcast that inspires women to be the driver in their own life through the life and stories of Black women with drive. And I'm your host, Shirley McAlpine. I'm a business consultant and executive coach and a leadership facilitator, working with people and organizations to live their lives by design and not default. Welcome back to another episode of She's Got Drive. And in this episode, we have another amazing woman from UNCF, and I'm excited that she is joining us, and I'll tell you a bit more about her in a minute. It's been a week. I'm wondering how, I'm just really struck by how fast we are moving through 2020. It feels fast for me. I don't know if it feels fast for you, but it certainly feels fast for me. And I wanted to just share a little bit about, I think this is going to be what's been driving me this week, little mini one of those, and that I'm really paying attention to not doing things that sabotage me. And what I'm talking about there is I'm noticing that like I spent all this time in the gym, building up my strength and so on. And then I go and eat things that don't serve me, don't support that. And not a big thing. I mean, if anyone looked at my diet, they would think, well, that's pretty healthy and balanced. But for me, there are things that I do that I know that doesn't support and enhance all the work that I'm doing in the gym. And so I think well, that's sabotage. That is sabotage. And I wonder about, so I'm now kind of curiously looking to see where else am I doing things like that. And that I might tell myself that it's okay, that it's not that important, or it's not long term, or it's only a little some. And I give myself a way out. And what would it be like if instead of tolerating that, having a tolerance for those places of sabotage, that I really took on not having that and having more alignment in some of those areas. So that's what I'm thinking about at the moment, really. And I wanted to share that with you. So I'm curious where are you doing a bit of sabotage? Where are you undermining, the good work that you're doing in an area of your life in one place, and then you do something else that counteracts that, as if it's like you take 2 steps back when you've taken 1 step forward. Where else? So it's a good question to kind of hold and inquire or journal about. Maybe you could do it in your journal. I also want to just do a big plug for my Facebook Lives. I said that I was coming back with Facebook Lives. I will be coming back on the 17th of February. I'm starting my Facebook Lives in the evening, and they're going to be at 6:30 Central Time, 7:30 Eastern time, and that would be 4:30 Pacific time. So you can find me on Facebook Live at that time, and on a Monday night. So that's now my night. That's where you'll find me, on Facebook, sharing, talking about the things that show up in She's Got Drive, and anything that really, in a conversation for what empowers us in having the life that we want and living our life by design and not default. That's what that's all about. Okay, so I would like to introduce Dr. Meridith Anderson. Now, Dr. Meredith Anderson has been in the education field for over 10 years, and she is currently the Senior Research Associate in K-12 Advocacy Department and Research Institute at UNCF, where she leads and designs research related to K-12 education reform for African American students. Her most recent publications are A Seat at the Table, African American Youth's Perceptions of K-12 Education, Lift Every Voice and Lead, African American Leaders' Perspectives of K-12 Education Reform, and Building Better Narratives in Black Education. You can see those are so interesting in themselves, so she's been steeped in this research for a good while. She was a program evaluator for Baltimore City Public Schools and is also an adjunct professor who serves on college readiness boards and presents at various conferences across the country. She is like a fascinating conversation about what we need to pay attention to from K through 12 education for young Black students, and how at what point do we get them college ready? Where are we putting our focus and attention on that for African American students? So she's a wealth of knowledge and expertise in this area, and I know you're going to get a lot out of this conversation, out of this interview that I had with her. I give you
Meredith, thank
Anderson.
you so much for being willing to be a guest on She's Got Drive.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation because I'm excited to find out about you and how you got to do the work that you're doing. But I'm also specifically interested in your area of work at UNCF that you're going to share with our listeners, because for us to explore what does that mean when in education for our young people on the planet. So, or in the States, really more specifically. So Meredith, tell us about yourself and your work and what you do at UNCF.
I've been here at UNCF for about 5 years, and I'm on the K-12 advocacy team here. And people kind of know UNCF for our support of our HBCUs and our offering college scholarships for students. We're the largest scholarship provider for minority students outside the federal government. We've been doing that for several years, but about 7 years ago, we started a K-12 advocacy division. And essentially what we wanted to do was highlight the crisis in education for our Black students. We know African-American students tend to be less likely to be college ready. We talk a lot about achievement gaps, but what we kind of want to push is, there's opportunity gaps. There's Black students are less likely to be taught by qualified teachers, less likely to have be exposed to rigorous courses in math and science. And so what we wanted to do was, one, highlight that crisis, but then two, talk to families and communities about ways that they can make sure that their students and their children are college ready. And so we've been doing that work for about 7 years. I've been here, for, like I said, for 4 years doing this work. And I'm the senior research associate on the team. And so what that means is I write a lot of our reports related to college readiness, getting the perspectives of African-American students and families, and just really getting their perspectives on education.
Right. And so I'm sure that there are many people who wouldn't know that UNCF is doing this work, because as you said, the association is so obviously strongly associated with the work that you do with HBCUs and scholarships, etc. So what is it that we need to be aware of as parents or as people who care about our young Black students?
Well, I think for us, we kind of think about it in terms of Making sure that there's high quality schools for all students.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a couple of things. One is we need to ensure that we have equitable representation, not only for teachers, but for leaders in schools. We've seen research dating back as far as maybe 1989 that shows that having a Black teacher in the classroom benefits not only Black students, but for all students. And so we've been making sure that we're pushing to ensure that Black and brown teachers are there in the classroom because we know they make a difference. And so that's one of our key areas that we focus on. But then also making sure that the schools are offering rigorous courses for students and making sure that they have access. So you have places in like Baltimore City Public Schools, for example, they recently expanded their offerings for advanced placement courses, similar to that we saw in DC as well. I think we want to make sure that we're pushing for rigorous courses, not just on the AP side, but then also for all students as well.
Right. As you were speaking about one of the first things around having Black teachers or teachers of color in the classroom is so important, because I noticed for myself when my daughter reached high school and then had her first Black woman teacher, I was like, oh my God, this is so good. Like finally, she's got someone who she can relate to in a different way.
Right.
It cannot be underestimated, the power of that, whatever level your kid is at, and wherever your kid is, to be able to go into a classroom and see someone who reflects your community is just so powerful.
I always kind of go back to, there was a picture that came out when President Obama was in office, and there's a little boy, African-American little boy, that just asked to touch his hair. And it was, just that symbolism of, this is somebody that looks like me. I can aspire to be, in that position. And so similar to, like you said, like with your daughter, just being able to have somebody there that they can aspire to. It's often, people say you can't be what you can't see. And so that's one way in the education sector that we've been kind of pushing.
Right. So you really are doing such important work, and you've written some books, Lift Every Voice and Lead, Building Better Narratives in Black Education, some the advocacy work that you're doing.
For all of those pieces, we wanted to make sure that we're highlighting African American voices in education reform. So if you look at, the nonprofit world, if you look at some of the major research tanks, even in Congress, it's majority white. You would think that just on the surface level that people think that African Americans aren't engaged or interested in this work. And so we know that that's not the case. We've been around for 75 years doing this work, not only with HBCUs, but like I said, we've been in the K-12 space.
Right.
And so it was important for us to highlight Black voices and making sure that they have their voices lifted and making sure that we're dispelling myths about our parents. Because in that first piece, we heard that close to 90% of our Black parents wanted their children to go to college. About 80% were, engaged in reading to their children. And so they are engaged. And so we wanted to dispel some of those myths. And that's what some of our latest pieces that you mentioned are looking at recently.
That's so critical. Again, I love that work that you're doing, because that's part of the battle, isn't it? As they engage with education establishments, is the expectation or as you said, the myths around them, that they're not interested, they're not supporting their children, which is not true. I want to spend some time exploring you and how you got into this work and what led you to this work. So what piqued your interest to get into work at the UNCF, and what were you doing before?
I've always loved to write. Even as a kid, I had a book organization, as I called it, where I was writing books. And so, I would write these little, short stories. Also, been interested in social justice work, even in high school, doing voter registration drives. And when I was in undergrad, I was really interested in just the disparities in high school dropout rates, especially amongst our Black males. That kind of led me into just wanting to do some research work. I did a summer program at Duke. It was called the Ralph Bunche Summer Institute, and this was a program for minority students interested in pursuing their doctoral work in political science. And so that kind of led me to pursue my PhD in that work. Then I kind of still had an interest in doing this research, but I knew I wanted to do the work from an equity lens and education lens. Right. And so that's what led me to UNCF, because it was rare to find a research institute that was studying African American student outcomes from the cradle to career. And so that's why it was really important for me to be able to work here at UNCF, because I was able to do that research and kind of set my own agenda with that work instead of having somebody set an agenda for me.
If you had to predict your trajectory to moving forward, where would you want your work in this field to continue to go to?
One thing that I really want to delve more into is doing more research related to counselors, school counselors, because we know having not only school counselors, but social workers, psychologists in the schools are just such a grave importance for students. Yeah. And so I really wanted to start doing that work. We've been doing some counselor trainings here, just at a couple of different conferences where we're talking to them, about not only the K-12 work, but then about HBCUs, because one thing that we heard sometimes at some of these conferences was that some of the counselors kind of dissuaded students from applying to HBCUs. They felt like they would push more of the state schools, or they just didn't have that knowledge base.
Right.
And so what we wanted to do is, let them know it's okay. You're not going to know about every single college, but you need to understand some of the major universities for African American students. And so that's what we've been trying to do, I guess, for the next wave of work.
Right. I'm curious, one of the things I ask all my guests is this notion of success, and what does success look like to them, and when do we know when we've arrived? Do we ever arrive? I'm curious to find out from your perspective. How do you define your success, and where do you feel like you are?
A given purpose, whether that's working out in your particular field, whether that's being at home, whether that's being a mother. I think there's multiple ways to really define success, but I think it's also just kind of cultivating a life that you're proud of. At the end of the day, say that you've made a difference in some particular capacity. For me, I've also been thinking of it not just being too busy. I think sometimes as women, and I can speak for myself, we have a tendency to, check so many lists. There's to-do lists. There's things we have to do. And for me, it's having success is also being able to slow down, to be able to rest, and just taking care of yourself. So I think that, to me, is really important when I think about, my life. And as I assess where I am now, is making sure I have that balance, or so to speak, if I can balance.
Yeah, well, I want to meet you there in that place, because I think it's so true. The pursuit of careers, or the pursuit of whatever those kind of major goals that we have in life, if it's owning your own home, or traveling, or fulfilling our purpose in terms of our work and what we want to do and what we want to contribute in the world, sometimes comes at a cost to our own well-being. And so I love that we say the success is the ability to slow down and then care for yourself a bit more. And right. so then it begs the question, how do you do that? What are you doing for yourself when you feel like, okay, I'm slowing down and I'm going to do X? How do you take care of yourself, and what does slowing down look like for you?
Yeah, and it's a work in progress.
Yes, I bet, right?
I'm a new mom. I have a 1-year-old, and so that's completely shifted, my sense of rest, right. Because you have your sleepless nights, and, my husband is really good at helping me find balance, because he knows that I tend to go, and he sometimes tells me, you're doing too much. You need to just take a minute. I'm really involved in my church. And so just going there to just kind of take a step back from the busyness of the week. And that's been helpful too.
Yeah. Where would you source your success from? Because you've got a doctorate. You're doing this sort of wonderful work at UNCF. You're a mother of a 1-year-old. So you've accomplished a lot, and so where would you source that from? Like, what is it, the messages that you got when you were younger? What was the strategies that adopted or learned as you've grown up that has helped you get to where you are, do you think?
So it's interesting. I think it would be multiple things for me. I grew up in a household with a strong mother. She had a strong mother. I really derived success from just seeing them and seeing, their drive and their tenacity. Same with my sister as well. And so I think having those examples has definitely been helpful for me. But I also, I grew up in the church. I was, what they call like a pew baby. I was often in church, from having Black History speeches to Christmas speeches to Easter speeches. Being able to navigate that as a child and watching that kind of helped lay the foundation for me in terms of my success. But I think it was also having that drive. But I've also just loved, my mom didn't have to push me. My mom or dad really didn't have to push me to do my work as a kid and growing up. That was never like my struggle, like get in there and do your homework. It was, I just often I just did it. I just had that, I guess, that intrinsic motivation.
Right.
But then also just different strategies and networking. I think for me, getting to this career path, I use my particular career path, I definitely had to network much more, especially being an introverted person. And so I think for me, I definitely had to get out my comfort zone to get where I'm at today.
I want to kind of explore that point there around being introverted, or more introverted and then networking, because people feel like they're mutually exclusive, but it's a skill development, isn't it? Networking, and and you have to do it. So how did you, for those people out there, because how did you get over that? How did you, what were you doing to develop yourself in that regard?
I think it was just, making sure that, for example, if I went to a panel that had a particular author or scholar that I was interested in talking to, I made sure I did my research, beforehand. So then I would wait after the panels and talk to them about their research, or talk to them in ways in which that, I could perhaps work with them in that area. And so, it definitely took some work in terms of just strategizing and making sure I was at the right places at the right time. But I think it, like I said, we are in a society that kind of values being an extrovert in different settings and making sure that you're up in front and talking. And for me, I do that, when I have to for my job. I do that, and for church. But I'd much rather be behind a desk writing my reports. The saying, to whom much is given, much is required. And so I know that I've had those skills and I have to cultivate them. And so I've definitely been working on that. It's still a work in progress, but it's something that I've had to do over the past couple of years.
I love that you're doing it though, and not avoiding it, and knowing that it's part of your development, and then you can retreat when you need to recharge. And I think we can't underestimate, if we want to, whatever field that we're working in, to move forward to accomplish those goals requires being
right.
Going with a focus and an intention is certainly something that I can hear them really, really helps.
Yeah.
So
and it helped. Oh,
go on. Yeah.
Oh, no. And I said it helped even landing me one of my first jobs here in the DC area, because there was a panel that I attended, and I waited and waited. Afterwards, sometimes there's long lines to speak to panelists. And so I waited and ended up speaking to a man that helped me land a internship. And so that landed me in another role that eventually led to another full-time position. And so it was just waiting and making sure that I just took initiative to, make that happen. And so again, it was, patience, because I was ready to leave, but that meeting eventually led to, being able to do that policy work, which led me to be in meetings with policymakers and eventually a governor. And so that kind of tenacity in terms of just waiting and making sure I'm being resilient when I'm not in my comfort zone has helped me in my career path too.
Great. Yeah, I think we underestimate that the power of one conversation leading to another, and and then, as you said, just being patient in the moment and what rewards it can bring. I'm curious then, what would you say really has been your biggest challenge to date?
I would say, after I completed my doctoral program, and I was applying to positions, I was applying to postdocs, and I wasn't landing anything. And so, people were telling me, of course, oh, you got this PhD, you're going to be able to get a job, you're going to work in policy. And, I was starting to believe it. I was like, oh, you're right. I got this PhD. And no, rejection after rejection, or even not even rejection. It was just people not even returning my calls. Not recalls, my actual submissions of my emails. And so for me, that was difficult because, I spent the last 8 years in education and I didn't have experience. And that's something that I heard. That's when I started doing more of the networking and when I got here to DC. And I was able to secure a postdoc at American University. And so I was able to come up here and teach some race and policy courses. But while I did that, I simultaneously was doing an internship where I could get some policy work. And so for me, it was challenging, but it helped me to shape who I am right now, because I had to make sure I worked hard to get to that position.
Right. In those moments, were you ever doubtful that it would turn out? And if you were, what did you do?
I was doubtful. I talked to my mom, I talked to my dad, and they provided me with that encouragement. I think I just kept my head down and kept applying. I was at a point where I was trying to figure out, would I stay in academia for the long term? Would I go into policy? And my heart was in policy.
So what motivates you to keep moving forward? Because the space that you're working in, whilst the advocacy is like you're making a difference, but it is a challenging space, isn't it, to know that the difficulties that our young black kids are having. And I'm sure you hear some stories which are horrendous, So what motivates you? What drives you to keep going?
I've always been driven by just trying to figure out ways that we can address inequities in various spaces. And so, I'm always thinking about the verse in Proverbs that talks about how we need to speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves. Right. And sometimes it's not that they can't speak up for themselves, but it's rather, how have our institutions and places set up to where certain voices are heard and others are not heard. And we see that, via institutional racism in our schools, in the criminal justice system. For me, that motivates me, being able to have that voice. Like I said, having this PhD, I often am able to be at the table, whereas sometimes others can't. And so for me, I'm always making sure that I'm talking about the inequities that I've seen, not only in the classroom, but then also in higher education. Right. So for me, I love being able to work here at UNCF at a Black organization, working on behalf of Black students. I think it's important for us to be able to create spaces in schools and programs that can affirm Black students' history and culture. I think far too often students go to school and they don't see themselves in the textbooks. They don't see themselves in the classroom in terms of teachers and leaders. And so for me, it's important that I do this work here. That kind of motivates me to do this work.
And thinking about, for other women who are, women of color Black women pursuing their goals, pursuing their purpose, wanting to make a difference. There are things that they care about. What advice would you give them?
I think one thing is to know that, one of the only things that's constant is change. There's often going to be changes, and you need to make sure that you're able to navigate that space. But I also think it's important to, have a voice. We often talk about, like you said, having a seat at the table. But it's also important to have a voice at that table, because I think there's plenty of people that will be happy at you sitting at the table but not saying anything. And that can take multiple forms. It can be in speaking, it can be in writing. I would say definitely make sure you make your voice heard.
So good, so good. Well, thank you so much for sharing some time with us and sharing your amazing work that you're doing at UNCF. If anyone wanted to kind of support your work in any way, how could they do that? Is there any way that they can participate, any way that they can support you?
Yes, if you go to, they can go to uncf.org, and you can find not only information about our scholarships, but also you can find our reports. You can also look at the Frederick Patterson Research Institute. We have several reports there from K-12 all the way until higher education. And so I would say checking the website would be the best way to stay engaged with us.
Perfect. I'm going to put a link in the show notes from this episode so that people can find the link. And I just want to thank you for all the important work that you're doing and the impact that you're having on the education of our Black children. It's just phenomenal work. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, then.
You will see that in this interview with Dr. Meridith Anderson, how much we really need to focus and pay attention to what our children need, how our children are doing in schools, how are they responding to their environment, how is the environment responding to them, who's teaching them, what difference is it making. And when they have the unique, unfortunately it's the unique experience of having a Black teacher teach them, the difference that makes is huge. And so what can we be doing to help in this area? Or if we have children who are from K through 12, how are we paying attention to what's happening in our schools, the schools that our children go to, and what difference could we make there? So lots to think about. And she's doing such amazing work. UNCF is doing sterling work, and if you want to support the organisation, you can donate to UNCF, and there's the link in the show notes that will take you to the page where you can make a donation to this such critical work that they are doing for African American students, for getting students college ready, for supporting students whilst they're in college, and for historical Black colleges. So I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to find out what you're getting from She's Got Drive. If you want to contact me, please find me, DM me on my Instagram account, or you can email me at shirleymcalpine.com/contact me. And you can always find me on the She's Got Drive Facebook page. She's Got Drive is produced by Cassandra Vortolina. The music is by the awesome or female band Blonde. The song is called Circles. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, go well and stay well.